I should have known something was wrong when I found my own work boots standing in wet concrete on the 17th basement level, except I was still wearing my boots. And according to the building plans, we were only supposed to dig down 3 floors. The boot prints were perfectly preserved in the foundation, still fresh after curing for 6 hours, and they led straight to a steel beam that had been carved with symbols that looked like they were made with human fingernails. Symbols that spelled out coordinates to every cemetery in the city. My name is Tony Rodriguez, and I've been working construction for 22 years. Framing, electrical, concrete, you name it. I've built it. After what happened at the Meridian Tower project downtown, I'm not sure I'll ever pick up a hammer again or trust a blueprint that doesn't show what's really buried underneath. The job started like any other high-rise project. 60-story luxury condos in downtown Seattle, prime real estate overlooking Elliott Bay. The developer, Abyssal Holdings, was paying union scale plus overtime for anyone willing to work the accelerated schedule. 6 months to complete what should have been an 18-month build. The money was too good to pass up, especially with my daughter starting college in the fall. I'd worked plenty of rush jobs before. Developers always want everything done yesterday, and they're usually willing to pay for the privilege. But this felt different from day one. The crew was too quiet, the foreman too eager, and the blueprints kept changing. Every morning, we'd get revised plans. Minor adjustments, they said. Structural modifications based on soil conditions. But I've been reading blueprints since before some of these engineers were born, and these weren't normal revisions. The basement kept getting deeper. The foundation kept getting more complex, and the steel reinforcement patterns didn't match any building code I'd ever seen. By week 3, we were digging down to the 7th basement level. That's when we started finding things that shouldn't have been there. The first discovery was a coffin. Victorian era, judging by the brass fittings, buried about 15 feet down. The site foreman, a guy named Walsh with dead eyes and hands that never seemed to get dirty, told us to work around it. City records showed this lot had been empty since the 1800s, he said. Probably just an old family burial that got missed in the surveys. But one coffin became 3, then 7, then dozens, all arranged in perfect geometric patterns that made my head hurt to look at directly, all positioned exactly where our steel supports were supposed to go. Just move the columns, Walsh would say whenever we found another burial. Engineering approved the changes. By the 5th week, we weren't finding coffins anymore. We were finding bodies, fresh ones, arranged in the same patterns, positioned with mathematical precision, bodies that the police couldn't identify, that had no missing persons reports, that seemed to appear overnight in places we'd already excavated. That's when my coworker Miguel stopped showing up for work. Miguel Santos had been my partner for 8 years, reliable as sunrise, never missed a day. Always first on site and last to leave. When he didn't show Monday morning, I figured he was sick. When he didn't show Tuesday, I got worried. When I went to his apartment Wednesday and found it empty, like he'd never lived there at all, I started asking questions. Miguel who? Walsh asked when I brought it up. We don't have anyone by that name on the crew, but I had photos on my phone of Miguel and me at the job site. Except when I looked at them, I was standing alone, talking to empty air. The safety log showed no record of Miguel Santos ever working the project. His time card didn't exist in the system. It was like he'd been erased. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Miguel, about the bodies in the foundation, about blueprints that changed themselves when nobody was looking. Around 2 a.m., I decided to drive back to the job site and see what was really happening after hours. The construction site at night was a different animal. During the day, it was organized chaos. The sound of equipment, workers calling out, the steady rhythm of progress. But after dark, it became something else. Something that felt hungry. I parked on a side street and walked to the chain-link fence surrounding the site. The security lights were on, casting long shadows between the equipment, but the place felt empty. Too empty. Construction sites are never completely quiet. There's always something settling, some piece of equipment cooling down, some sound of the city beyond the walls. This was silent in a way that made my ears ring. I found a gap in the fence and slipped through, moving carefully between the concrete mixers and crane bases. The excavation for the basement levels was massive now, a rectangular pit that seemed to go down forever. According to the most recent blueprints I'd seen, we were at level 12, but looking down into that hole, I could see lights much deeper than 12 floors. I climbed down the temporary stairs we'd built along the excavation walls, my footsteps echoing in the darkness. The deeper I went, the colder it got. By the time I reached what should have been the bottom level, I could see my breath in the air, but it wasn't the bottom. There were more stairs leading down, more levels carved out of the earth. Levels that didn't exist on any blueprint. Levels that formed patterns when viewed from above, the geometric shapes that hurt to look at, that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And there were people working down there. Dozens of them, moving with mechanical precision in the darkness, but they weren't using flashlights or work lamps. They were working by the light of something that glowed red and cast shadows that moved independently of the people making them. I crept closer, staying in the darkness between levels, and that's when I recognized one of the workers. It was Miguel, or something that looked like Miguel. Same height, same build, same distinctive way of holding his shoulders, but his skin had a gray pallor, and his eyes reflected the red light like an animal's. He was arranging bodies in the foundation. Human bodies, positioned according to some pattern I couldn't understand, and as he worked, he was humming. A melody I'd never heard before, but that somehow felt familiar, like something I'd heard in dreams. I watched for maybe 20 minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing. There were other workers I recognized, guys from our crew who were supposed to be home sleeping, all of them moving with that same mechanical precision, all of them with that same gray skin and reflective eyes, and supervising them, walking between the levels with a clipboard and a measuring tape, was Walsh. But this version of Walsh was different. Taller, with skin like charcoal and eyes that burned like coals. And growing from his forehead, barely visible in the red light, were two small horns. That's when I understood. We weren't building a luxury condo tower. We were building something else entirely. Something that required specific measurements, specific patterns, specific sacrifices. The bodies in the foundation weren't random victims. They were workers from previous projects, men who'd asked too many questions or seen too much, men like Miguel, who'd been taken and replaced by things that looked like them but weren't them. I backed away from the edge, moving as quietly as I could toward the stairs. But as I reached the first landing, I heard Walsh's voice echoing up from the depths. "Tony Rodriguez," he called, and his voice carried implications that made my skin crawl. "I know you're up there. Why don't you come down and join us? We have so much work to do." I ran. Up the stairs, across the excavation site, through the gap in the fence, to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, but as I drove away, I could see lights moving in the depths of the construction site, and I could swear I heard the sound of heavy machinery starting up, even though it was 3 a.m. and no legitimate construction work happens at that hour. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, then called the police. But when Officer Martinez arrived at my apartment to take my statement, he looked confused. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said, "there's no construction project at that address. That lot's been empty for decades." I showed him photos I'd taken of the job site. but they showed nothing but an empty lot overgrown with weeds. I showed him my work schedule, my paychecks from Abyssal Holdings, but according to his computer, no such company existed. "Sir," Officer Martinez said gently, "have you been under any unusual stress lately? Any changes in medication? Sometimes when people work too hard, they can experience." But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what was happening in that hole in the ground, and I knew I had to stop it, even if nobody believed me. That afternoon, I drove back to the site. In daylight, it looked exactly like Officer Martinez had said, an empty lot with a for sale sign and grass growing through cracks in the old pavement. But when I walked to the center of the lot and looked down, I could see the outlines of the excavation in the dirt, faint impressions where heavy machinery had operated, subtle changes in the ground level that suggested something massive had been dug and then covered up. And in the exact center of the lot, I found a steel beam. Just one, sticking up from the ground like a gravestone. Carved into its surface were the same symbols I'd seen in my dreams, the same patterns that had been burned into the concrete in the deepest levels of the excavation, but now I could read them. Somehow, overnight, I'd learned to understand what they meant. They were coordinates, not just geographical coordinates, but dimensional ones. Locations where the barrier between our world and something else was thin enough to break through, and according to the symbols on that beam, Seattle was just the first city. There were coordinates for Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Houston, dozens of major population centers where similar projects were either planned or already underway. I spent the next week researching Abyssal Holdings, tracking down permits and building records. What I found was a pattern going back decades. Construction projects that appeared suddenly, operated for exactly 6 months, then vanished without a trace, always in major cities, always on lots with specific geological features, always following the same timeline, and always leaving behind empty lots where something had been built, then covered up, then forgotten. The workers on these projects, men like me, like Miguel, like dozens of others whose names I found in old union records, would simply vanish. No forwarding addresses, no unemployment claims, no trace in social security records, as if they'd never existed at all. But they had existed, and something was using their bodies, their skills, their knowledge, to build something that spanned multiple cities, multiple dimensions, something that required human sacrifice to anchor it in our reality. I tried going to the FBI, to the State Construction Oversight Board, to anyone who might listen, but every official I spoke to had the same response. There were no records of any construction project at that location. No permits had been issued, no complaints had been filed, no safety violations had occurred. I was either lying or delusional. Those were the only explanations anyone would accept. That's when I realized I was on my own. If this thing was going to be stopped, I would have to stop it myself. And I would have to do it before the next phase of construction began, because according to the patterns I'd mapped out, the final phase required something more than just worker sacrifices. It required someone who understood the project from the inside, someone who'd helped build the foundation, who knew the structural specifications, who could complete the final connections between the different sites. It required me. The text message came at 3:33 a.m. on a Thursday morning. "Ready to get back to work, Tony? We have one more job to finish and we need someone with your expertise." The number was Miguel's. But Miguel had been missing for 3 weeks, and his phone had been disconnected. When I tried calling back, I heard his voice on the voicemail. "Hey, this is Miguel. I'm working late again, but leave a message and I'll get back to you when the project is done." I looked out my apartment window and saw a familiar truck parked across the street. My truck, the same make, model, year, and color, right down to the dent in the tailgate from when I'd backed into a fire hydrant last summer, but my truck was sitting in my driveway, exactly where I'd left it. There were 2 of everything now. 2 trucks, 2 sets of work clothes, 2 Tony Rodriguez. The question was, which one was real? My phone buzzed with another text. The foundation is almost complete, but we need you to install the final support beam. The one that connects all the sites together. The one that opens the door. I grabbed my tool belt and headed for the door. Not because I wanted to help them, but because I was the only one who understood the construction well enough to sabotage it. If I could damage the support structure, disrupt the geometric patterns, break the connections between sites. But as I reached for my truck keys, I realized they weren't on the hook where I always left them. They were already in my hand, warm as if I'd been holding them for hours, and I couldn't remember picking them up. The drive to the construction site felt like sleepwalking. I knew where I was going, but I couldn't remember deciding to go there. My hands turned the steering wheel, my foot pressed the accelerator, but I felt like a passenger in my own body. The empty lot wasn't empty anymore. The construction site was back, exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks ago. Equipment humming, lights blazing, the sound of work being done in the depths below ground level, as if it had never been gone, as if the empty lot had been the illusion. Walsh was waiting for me at the gate, clipboard in hand, that same dead smile on his face. But now I could see him clearly. The charcoal skin, the burning eyes, the horns that were no longer small bumps but full-grown curved spikes extending from his skull. "Tony," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Right on time. We saved the most important job for you." Behind him, I could see the other workers. Dozens of men I'd worked with over the years, from this project and others, all with that same gray pallor, all moving with mechanical precision, all dead, but still working. "The final support beam," Walsh continued, "needs to be installed by someone who understands the structural requirements, someone who's been part of the project from the beginning, someone whose essence can be permanently integrated into the foundation." He handed me a hard hat. When I put it on, I could suddenly see the project as it really was. Not just the Seattle site, but all of them. Dozens of identical excavations in cities across the country, all connected by tunnels that existed in dimensions between the physical and the spiritual, all building toward the same goal, opening a doorway large enough for something ancient and hungry to step through. "What is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Walsh smiled, and his teeth were black iron, an old friend. Something that's been sleeping beneath the earth for thousands of years, dreaming of the day when humanity would be advanced enough, organized enough, to serve as proper hosts. I looked down into the excavation, at the geometric patterns carved into the earth, at the bodies arranged in mathematical precision throughout the foundation. Each site was a single component of a massive summoning circle, and I had helped build it. "The final beam," Walsh said, "goes here." He pointed to a gap in the structure at the very center of the deepest level. "Install that, and the doorway opens. Refuse." He gestured to the gray-skinned workers around us. "And you join them. Either way, the work gets done." I took the beam, a piece of steel carved with symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and started down into the excavation. With each step, I could feel the weight of what I was carrying. Not just the physical weight of the steel, but the metaphysical weight of what it represented. This was the keystone, the final piece that would complete a construction project spanning decades and multiple dimensions. The piece that would wake something up that had been sleeping since before human civilization began, and I was the only one who could install it correctly. At the bottom of the excavation, I could see the support cradle where the beam was supposed to go. It was positioned directly over what looked like a natural cave system, except the walls of the cave were covered in the same symbols that decorated the beam, symbols that glowed with their own light, pulsing in rhythm with something deep underground, something that was getting stronger. As I lowered the beam into position, I realized I had a choice. I could install it correctly, completing the summoning circle and dooming humanity to serve as hosts for whatever was waiting in the dimensional space between worlds. Or I could install it wrong, deliberately sabotage the structural integrity and bring the entire project crashing down. The only problem was that sabotaging it would probably kill me. The dimensional backlash from a collapsed summoning circle of this magnitude would likely vaporize everyone within a mile radius, but it would also prevent something infinitely worse from happening. I positioned the beam in the support cradle, then reached for my welding torch. The final connections had to be made with steel fused at precisely the right temperatures, creating bonds strong enough to channel interdimensional energy without melting. Instead, I set the torch to maximum heat and began welding the beam at angles that would create critical stress points, weak spots that would fail under load, bringing down not just the Seattle site but disrupting the geometric relationships between all the connected sites. The symbols on the cave walls began flashing faster, and I could hear something roaring in the distance. Deep underground, something ancient was stirring. Sensing that its doorway was almost complete, I finished the final weld just as Walsh's voice echoed down from above. "Tony, what are you doing down there? The energy patterns are all wrong." But it was too late. The deliberately flawed welds were already failing, the support structure beginning to buckle. The geometric patterns carved into the earth were losing their mathematical precision as the foundation shifted and cracked. And in the caves below, something that had been dreaming of conquest was being forced back into sleep by the collapse of its carefully constructed doorway. The excavation came down like a controlled demolition, layer after layer of steel and concrete folding in on itself. I ran for the emergency stairs, but the structure was failing faster than I could climb. The dimensional backlash hit me just as I reached the 5th level, a wave of energy that felt like being struck by lightning while drowning in molten metal. The last thing I remember was the sound of something massive roaring in frustration as its prison door slammed shut again. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. According to the doctors, I'd been found unconscious in an empty lot downtown, suffering from severe electrical burns and talking about construction projects that didn't exist. They attributed my injuries to a lightning strike, though there hadn't been any storms in the Seattle area that week. The lot where the Meridian Tower project had been was empty again, overgrown with weeds. But if you knew where to look, you could still see the faint outlines in the earth where something massive had been built and then destroyed. The official report said I'd suffered a psychotic break brought on by work stress and financial pressures. The union put me on medical leave and strongly suggested I consider early retirement. My insurance covered the hospital bills and 6 months of therapy with a counselor who specialized in construction-related trauma. But I knew what had really happened, and more importantly, I knew it wasn't over. The Seattle site had been destroyed, but there were still dozens of others under construction. Other cities, other excavations, other support beams that needed to be installed by workers who understood the structural requirements. And somewhere in those other cities, men like me were getting text messages from dead co-workers, driving trucks that shouldn't exist, and being offered jobs that paid too much for projects that would end the world. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a simple website where I posted everything I knew about Abyssal Holdings, about construction projects that appeared and disappeared, about workers who vanished without a trace. I included photos of the symbols, blueprints of the geometric patterns, GPS coordinates of every suspicious construction site I could identify. Most people thought I was crazy, but a few believed me. Other construction workers who'd noticed similar patterns. Other men who'd lost co-workers to projects that officially didn't exist. And slowly, we started organizing. A network of builders who knew what to look for, who understood the signs, who could sabotage the projects from the inside before they reached completion. We call ourselves the Union, not because we're affiliated with any official labor organization, but because we're united in purpose, preventing the construction of doorways that should never be opened. We've stopped 7 projects so far: Phoenix, Dallas, Atlanta, Detroit, Boston, Denver, and Portland. Each time, we manage to get one of our people onto the crew, someone who understands the structural requirements well enough to introduce critical flaws into the foundation. Each time, we save a city from becoming a feeding ground for something that views humanity as a construction material. But there are more sites being started every month. More empty lots being purchased by shell companies with names like Pandemonium Holdings and Infernum Construction. More workers being recruited for projects that pay too well and require too much secrecy. And each time we destroy one of their sites, they learn from our sabotage. The construction gets more complex, the geometric patterns more sophisticated, the dimensional anchoring more robust. They're getting better at what they do, and eventually, they'll build something we can't destroy. The question is whether we can identify and stop enough sites to prevent them from reaching critical mass. According to the calculations I've done based on the symbol patterns, they need at least 37 completed sites to create a stable doorway. We've destroyed 7, which leaves at least 30 more under construction somewhere. 30 chances for them to succeed. 30 chances for something ancient and hungry to step through into our reality. If you work in construction, if you know someone who does, if you see job postings for projects that seem too good to be true, pay attention to the details. Notice if the blueprints keep changing. Notice if coworkers start disappearing. Notice if the foundation patterns look like geometric shapes instead of standard building foundations. Because some buildings aren't meant to house people. Some foundations aren't meant to support structures. And some construction projects are building bridges to places where things have been waiting a very long time for an invitation to visit our world. Trust me on this one. I've seen what they're trying to build, and I've seen what happens to the workers who helped them build it. Keep your eyes open, watch for the signs, and remember, if a construction job seems too good to be true, it probably is. The only question is what they're really asking you to build, and whether you'll figure it out before you become another body in the foundation. Because in the end, we're all just building materials to them. And they're very, very good at construction. I found my new supervisor hanging upside down from the ceiling of his office, speaking fluent Latin into a conference call with entities that cast shadows shaped like screaming faces. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, he rotated his head 180 degrees without moving his body and said, "Blake, perfect timing. I need you to explain to our clients why humanity is worth preserving. My name is Blake Harrison, and I used to be a federal agent." Emphasis on used to be. After what I discovered at the Department of Homeland Security's Special Investigations Unit, I'm not sure what I am anymore, or if the thing typing this is even human. My recruitment started normally enough. 15 years with the Bureau, specializing in domestic terrorism and cult-related crimes. Clean service record, high clearance, a reputation for handling cases that made other agents uncomfortable. When the offer came to transfer to DHS SIU, I figured it was a promotion. Better pay, better benefits, and work that would actually matter in the post-9/11 security landscape. The orientation briefing should have been my first clue that this wasn't a normal federal assignment. The conference room had no windows and smelled like ozone and burnt copper. The walls were covered with maps, but not of any geography I recognized. These showed terrain that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them, with city names written in languages that hurt to read. Director Sarah Walsh stood at the head of the table, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Next to her sat a man I'd later know as Agent Carter, who was taking notes in what appeared to be hieroglyphics. "Agent Harrison," Director Walsh began, "everything you're about to learn is classified beyond top secret. We're talking about information that could cause mass panic, social collapse, or worse if it became public knowledge." She clicked a remote, and the wall screen displayed what looked like a satellite photo of the Pacific Ocean. except there was something in the water, something massive, darker than the surrounding sea, with edges that seemed to bend light around them. This was taken 6 months ago, approximately 200 miles west of the California coast. The object measures roughly 12 miles in length and appears to be artificial in origin. I studied the image. Whatever it was big enough to be visible from space, but it didn't match any known vessel or natural phenomenon. Chinese submarine? Some kind of experimental aircraft? Agent Carter looked up from his hieroglyphic note-taking. Agent Harrison, that object is currently moving toward the coastline at a speed that should be hydrodynamically impossible. It's also broadcasting signals on frequencies that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of electromagnetic radiation. Director Walsh clicked to the next slide. This time it was an audio waveform, jagged peaks and valleys that formed patterns too complex to be random noise. We've been monitoring these transmissions for 3 months. Our linguistics team believes there's some form of communication, but not with any terrestrial intelligence. The mathematical structures embedded in the signal suggest a level of complexity that exceeds human cognitive capabilities. She looked directly at me. Agent Harrison, your job at SIU is to help us figure out how to respond when that thing reaches our territorial waters, because according to our calculations, it will arrive in approximately 18 months. Respond how? That depends on whether it comes in peace or whether it comes to harvest. The word harvest hung in the air like a threat. I'd investigated enough cult crimes to know that when people started talking about harvesting humans, the situation was already beyond federal law enforcement capabilities. Director, what exactly is the Special Investigations Unit investigating? Agent Carter closed his notebook and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Extinction-level events, Agent Harrison. Our job is to monitor, assess, and if possible, prevent scenarios that could end human civilization. Director Walsh nodded. We coordinate with entities that have longer historical perspectives than most government agencies, beings who've been watching Earth for centuries, who understand the cosmic context that most humans aren't equipped to comprehend. What kind of entities? Oh, she smiled, and I noticed her canine teeth were slightly longer than normal, the kind that used to be called demons, Agent Harrison. But terminology is less important than functionality. They work for us because we have common interests. That's when I realized I wasn't working for a normal federal agency. I was working for something that existed in the spaces between official government structures, something that dealt with threats too large for conventional law enforcement and too strange for military response. Your first assignment, Director Walsh continued, is to review our case files and familiarize yourself with current threat assessments. Agent Carter will be your partner. He's been with SIU for 7 years, and he'll help you understand our operational protocols. Agent Carter stood up, and I noticed he moved with fluid precision that reminded me of dancers or predators. Agent Harrison, I should mention that our work requires certain enhancements to standard human capabilities. Enhanced pattern recognition, resistance to psychic influence, expanded sensory awareness. What kind of enhancements? Voluntary symbiotic integration with entities that specialize in cosmic threat detection. Think of it as advanced training, except the training becomes part of your neurological structure. I looked around the windowless conference room, at the maps of impossible geography, at my new colleagues who spoke about demons like consultants and discussed humanity like a resource management problem. And if I refuse? Director Walsh's smile widened, showing more of those elongated teeth. Then you'll be transferred back to standard bureau assignments. Your security clearance will be revoked, and you'll spend the rest of your career investigating tax fraud in Cleveland. She leaned forward. But, Agent Harrison, if you accept the enhancements, you'll have capabilities that most humans can only dream of. You'll see threats before they manifest, understand patterns that span centuries, and help protect humanity from things that view our entire species as a minor inconvenience. I thought about my 15-year career, about the cases that had kept me awake at night, about the sense that I was always fighting symptoms rather than causes. If there was a chance to work on problems that actually mattered, to prevent rather than investigate, what do I have to do? Agent Carter pulled out what looked like a medical consent form, except it was written in multiple languages, including several that used symbols instead of letters. Sign here, Agent Harrison, and welcome to the real federal government. The enhancement procedure took place in a basement facility beneath the DHS building, in rooms that weren't shown on any official blueprints. The medical staff spoke in whispers and wore scrubs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dr. Martinez, the lead technician, explained the process while preparing what looked like an IV drip filled with liquid that moved independently of gravity. The symbiotic entity will integrate with your nervous system gradually over the next 48 hours. You'll experience some disorientation as your sensory processing expands, but most agents adapt within a week. What exactly is this entity? Think of it as a specialized information processing system that's evolved specifically to detect cosmic-scale threats. It's been monitoring Earth for approximately 30 years, and it's willing to share its capabilities with humans who can help it preserve this planet. Dr. Martinez inserted the IV needle, and immediately I could feel something cold spreading through my bloodstream. Not painful, exactly, but alien. Like having thoughts that weren't my own mixing with my consciousness. The entity's name is approximately translatable as Watcher of Distant Fires. Dr. Martinez continued, it will communicate with you through enhanced pattern recognition and intuitive leaps that feel like your own insights. Most agents describe it as suddenly understanding connections they couldn't see before. The integration process was like learning to see colors that didn't have names. Over the next 2 days, I began noticing patterns everywhere. In the way shadows fell across walls, in the rhythm of traffic outside my apartment, in the facial expressions of people I passed on the street, but more than patterns. I began seeing threats. The businessman reading a newspaper on the subway wasn't just reading news. He was absorbing information about infrastructure vulnerabilities, memorizing details about population density and emergency response protocols. When I focused on him, I could see a faint outline around his body, like heat distortion. But wrong. The woman walking her dog in the park near my apartment wasn't just exercising her pet. She was conducting surveillance, mapping sightlines and escape routes with the precision of military reconnaissance. Her dog's eyes reflected light like mirrors, and when it looked at me, I heard something whisper in a language I didn't recognize. The enhanced perception was overwhelming at first. Every person I encountered might be a potential threat. Every normal activity might be preparation for something sinister. But gradually, I learned to filter the signals, to distinguish between ordinary human behavior and the activities of entities that were wearing human faces. My first case briefing was an education in cosmic horror. Director Walsh spread satellite photos across the conference table, images of locations around the world where reality seemed to be developing stress fractures, areas where the normal laws of physics were breaking down, where things that shouldn't exist were beginning to manifest. The object in the Pacific isn't our only concern, she explained. We're detecting similar anomalies in 17 other locations worldwide. Something is preparing Earth for occupation. Agent Carter pointed to a photo of what appeared to be a perfectly normal wheat field in Kansas. This farmland has been producing crops that are nutritionally identical to wheat, but genetically impossible. The plants are absorbing minerals from the soil that don't exist on Earth, and they're growing in mathematical patterns that suggest intelligent cultivation. Cultivation by who? By entities that are preparing a food source for something that doesn't eat normal terrestrial organic matter. Director Walsh showed me another photo, this one of a housing development in suburban Phoenix. These homes were built according to standard architectural plans, but when surveyed with enhanced sensing equipment, They form geometric patterns that serve as communication arrays for trans-dimensional coordination. I studied the image. From above, the houses did seem to be arranged in patterns too precise to be coincidental. The residents know about this? The residents are part of it. They've been recruited into a preparation program. They believe they're participating in a community improvement initiative, but they're actually serving as biological anchors for entities that exist partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere. Agent Carter opened his notebook to a page covered with those hieroglyphic symbols. Agent Harrison, we estimate that approximately 2.3 million humans worldwide are currently serving as unwitting infrastructure for the approaching entities. They're building communication networks, agricultural systems, and housing facilities designed to support post-occupation civilization. Post-occupation? Director Walsh looked at me with those predator eyes. Agent Harrison, the object in the Pacific isn't a scout vessel. It's a construction platform. When it reaches our coastline, it will begin transforming Earth's environment to make it suitable for entities that view humans as we view livestock. The scope of what they were describing was beyond anything I'd encountered in federal law enforcement. Global conspiracy, environmental manipulation, systematic preparation for species-level subjugation, and according to my enhanced perception, it was all true. I could see the patterns in the data, connections that span decades and continents. What's our response strategy? That's where our consulting relationships become relevant, Director Walsh said. We work with entities that have experience defending inhabited worlds against cosmic predators, beings that understand the larger galactic context and know how to fight threats at this scale. Agent Carter stood up and walked to the conference room door. Agent Harrison, I'd like you to meet our senior consulting partners. He opened the door, and 3 figures entered the room. They looked human at first glance, but the enhanced perception immediately identified them as something else. Their movements were too fluid, their facial expressions too controlled, and their eyes reflected light like polished metal. Agent Harrison, Director Walsh said, meet Agents Belial, Marchosius, and Belphegor. They've been coordinating our planetary defense initiatives. The one called Belial sat down at the conference table with mechanical precision. When he spoke, his voice had harmonics that made my teeth ache. Agent Harrison, we've been monitoring your integration with the Watcher entity. Your adaptation rate is impressive for a human. Thank you. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment of your usefulness in the coming conflict. Marchosius opened a briefcase and removed what looked like tactical planning documents, except the map showed terrain that existed in dimensions perpendicular to normal space. The approaching entities are what your species might call cosmic farmers. They seed worlds with infrastructure, cultivate the native populations until they reach optimal density, then harvest the entire biosphere for resources that don't exist in uninhabited space. Resources like what? Belphegor smiled, revealing teeth that were crystal rather than bone. Consciousness, Agent Harrison. Organized thought patterns, emotional energy, the specific type of temporal distortion that occurs when billions of self-aware beings exist in the same dimensional space. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They're going to harvest human consciousness, not just human consciousness. They're going to harvest the entire noospheric structure that humanity has built over the past several millennia. Your art, your science, your religions, your collective unconscious. Everything that makes human civilization unique will be extracted and processed into cognitive fuel for entities that exist primarily as organized information. Director Walsh leaned forward. Agent Harrison, these 3 consultants represent a faction that opposes the cosmic farming operations. They've been helping us develop countermeasures. Why would demons want to help humanity? Belial's expression didn't change. Because we need this planet too, Agent Harrison. We've spent centuries building symbiotic relationships with human consciousness. If Earth gets harvested, we lose our primary base of operations in this galactic sector. So, you're protecting us to protect yourselves? Correct. But the end result is the same. Earth remains inhabited by humans rather than being converted into a processing facility for cosmic agriculture. Agent Carter pulled out another set of photos. Agent Harrison, these are the countermeasures we've been implementing. Disruption of the communication networks, contamination of the agricultural preparation sites, elimination of human collaborators who've progressed beyond the possibility of reversal. I looked at the images. They showed what appeared to be crime scenes. Bodies arranged in patterns that suggested ritual murder. Buildings destroyed by fires that burned in colors I'd never seen before. We're killing people? Marchosius nodded. We're killing people who are no longer people, Agent Harrison. The advanced collaborators have been neurologically restructured to serve as organic components in the invasion infrastructure. They retain human appearance and basic behavioral patterns, but their consciousness has been replaced with processing subroutines designed to optimize preparation activities. How can you tell the difference? Belphegor gestured to my enhanced perception. Your symbiotic entity will identify compromised humans automatically. They'll appear to have multiple overlapping outlines, like photographic double exposures. Their thoughts will echo with harmonic frequencies that don't originate in human neurological structures. I spent the rest of that briefing learning to use enhanced perception as a threat detection system. By the end of the day, I could identify compromised humans from across a crowded room, recognize artificial agricultural products by their geometric growth patterns, and spot trans-dimensional communication arrays disguised as normal suburban architecture. The knowledge was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because it revealed the scope of how thoroughly Earth had been infiltrated. Liberating because it finally gave me the tools to fight back against threats that normal law enforcement couldn't even perceive. My first field assignment was in Portland, Oregon, investigating a community garden that was producing vegetables with nutritional profiles that didn't match terrestrial biology. According to satellite analysis, the garden plots were arranged in patterns that served as relay stations for communication with the Pacific Ocean object. I arrived at the garden on a Tuesday morning, posing as a federal inspector conducting routine agricultural safety assessments. The garden manager, a woman named Susan Chen, greeted me with a smile that looked human but felt wrong to my enhanced perception. "Inspector Harrison," she said, "we're so pleased to have federal recognition of our community improvement efforts. This garden has brought our neighborhood together in ways we never imagined possible." She led me through rows of vegetables that looked normal but cast shadows that moved independently of the plants. The tomatoes were perfectly spherical. The corn grew in mathematical spirals, and the lettuce leaves formed fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The soil here is remarkably fertile," Susan continued. "We've been able to grow crops that produce yields far beyond normal agricultural expectations. Our vegetables provide complete nutritional profiles that eliminate the need for supplementary vitamins or minerals." I knelt down to examine one of the tomato plants more closely. Through enhanced perception, I could see that its root system extended much deeper than normal, forming geometric patterns that connected with other plants throughout the garden. The entire facility was a single, integrated organism masquerading as individual vegetable plots. How many people are participating in the community garden program? Oh, almost everyone in the neighborhood now. 847 families to be precise. We found that community participation rates improve significantly when everyone understands the long-term benefits of coordinated agricultural activity. 847 families. In a single Portland neighborhood, nearly 1,000 people had been recruited into the preparation program. And based on the patterns I was seeing, they weren't just growing alien vegetables. They were being systematically neurologically modified to serve as organic infrastructure components. "Susan, how long have you been managing this garden?" She paused, and for just a moment, her expression flickered like a television with bad reception. "I've been coordinating community agricultural activities for as long as necessary. Inspector Harrison. Community development is an ongoing process that requires sustained commitment from all demographic segments. The formal language, the precise phrasing, the way she spoke about humans like statistical categories. Susan Chen was no longer human. She was a processing subroutine wearing Susan Chen's face and using Susan Chen's memories to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I'd like to take some soil samples for analysis. Of course, federal oversight ensures optimal compliance with regulatory standards. As I collected soil samples that I knew would test positive for elements that didn't exist on Earth, I noticed other garden participants working throughout the facility. Men, women, children, all moving with that same mechanical precision I'd observed in Agent Carter, all speaking in the same formal, emotionally neutral language, all compromised beyond the possibility of reversal. That night, I called Director Walsh to report my findings. The entire neighborhood has been converted. 847 people serving as biological infrastructure for trans-dimensional communication. They're too far gone for extraction. Understood. Agent Harrison, are you prepared to implement containment protocols? I knew what that meant. Elimination of the compromised population before they could complete their preparation activities. Nearly 1,000 people who looked human but weren't human anymore, who had to be stopped before they finished building infrastructure for Earth's cosmic occupation. Director, these people have families, friends, connections throughout the city. Their disappearance will trigger investigations. Agent Harrison, their continued existence will trigger the end of human civilization. Which outcome do you prefer? I spent the next 3 days developing a containment strategy, working with Agent Carter and the demonic consultants. We identified the critical infrastructure components that needed to be destroyed and calculated the minimum elimination required to disrupt the network. The operation took place on a Friday night when most of Portland was focused on normal human activities. We used directed energy weapons that left no forensic evidence, targeting the neurological structures that maintain the artificial consciousness while leaving the organic bodies intact. To external observers, it looked like a mass medical emergency. 847 people throughout a single neighborhood suddenly collapsing from what appeared to be simultaneous stroke events. The hospitals were overwhelmed, the media blamed environmental toxins, and the federal investigation was quietly transferred to agencies that specialized in covering up incidents that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. But the community garden withered and died within hours of the elimination operation. The geometric plant patterns dissolved into normal random growth. The soil tested negative for impossible elements, and the trans-dimensional communication signal stopped broadcasting to the Pacific Ocean object. We'd prevented one neighborhood from serving as invasion infrastructure, but the cost was nearly 1,000 human lives. Lives of people who'd been recruited, modified, and utilized without ever understanding what was happening to them. Agent Carter found me in the hotel bar afterward, staring at a drink I couldn't bring myself to consume. Your first mass elimination operation is always difficult, Agent Harrison, but you'll adapt. How many operations like this have you conducted? 47, across 12 different states. Approximately 23, 0 compromised individuals eliminated before they could complete their infrastructure assignments. I looked at him, trying to see past the enhanced perception to whatever human consciousness might still exist underneath the modifications. Carter, are you still human? He considered the question for a long moment. I don't know. Agent Harrison, after 7 years of symbiotic integration and operational enhancement, I'm not sure the distinction is meaningful anymore. I think human thoughts. I feel human emotions. I care about human survival. But I also process information in ways that normal humans can't, and make decisions based on cosmic-scale threat assessments that span centuries. Do you miss being normal? I miss the simplicity of normal human problems. Tax fraud, domestic violence, drug trafficking, crimes that could be solved through conventional law enforcement methods. But I don't miss the ignorance, Agent Harrison. I don't miss living in a universe where I couldn't see the threats that were preparing to destroy everything I cared about. Over the next 6 months, I participated in 14 similar operations: Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, Phoenix, Chicago, Detroit. Major cities where compromised populations had been building infrastructure for cosmic occupation. Each operation required eliminating hundreds or thousands of people who looked human, but weren't human anymore. And with each operation, I could feel myself changing. Not just the enhanced perception, but my emotional responses, my decision-making processes, my fundamental understanding of what it meant to be human in a universe that contained threats beyond human comprehension. The symbiotic entity, the watcher of distant fires, was becoming more integrated with my consciousness. Its perspective was becoming my perspective, its priorities becoming my priorities, and its 3-0-year view of Earth's history was making individual human lives seem less significant than the species-level survival calculations that drove our operations. I was becoming something that could kill nearly 1,000 people to save the planet and feel justified in doing so. The final briefing came 8 months after my recruitment, when satellite analysis confirmed that the Pacific Ocean object had stopped moving toward the California coast. The elimination operations had disrupted enough of the preparation infrastructure to delay the invasion timeline, giving us additional time to develop more comprehensive countermeasures. "Agent Harrison," Director Walsh said, "congratulations. Your operational effectiveness has exceeded our expectations for enhanced human agents." I looked around the conference room at Agent Carter, at the demonic consultants, at my colleagues who existed in the spaces between human and something else. "Director, I need to ask you something. Am I still human?" Belial answered before Director Walsh could respond. "Agent Harrison, that question assumes that humanity is a fixed state rather than a spectrum of possibilities. You retain human emotional attachments, human moral frameworks, and human cognitive patterns. But you also possess capabilities that extend beyond normal human limitations. The question isn't whether you're still human," Marchosius added. "The question is whether you're still human enough to care about protecting humanity." I thought about the 23-0 people we'd eliminated, about the neighborhoods we'd saved, about the planet that remained inhabited by humans rather than converted into cosmic agricultural infrastructure. I thought about my enhanced perception, my symbiotic integration, my ability to see threats that normal humans couldn't comprehend. "I care," I said, "but I'm not sure my caring is human anymore." Director Walsh smiled with those predator teeth. "Agent Harrison, welcome to the next phase of human evolution. The phase where we become capable of fighting threats that would destroy us if we remained limited by normal human capabilities." She handed me a new assignment folder. "The Pacific Ocean object has been joined by similar objects in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The cosmic farming operation is escalating to global scale, and we need agents who can coordinate planetary defense initiatives." I opened the folder and saw satellite images of massive artificial structures beneath the surface of all 3 major oceans, communication arrays that spanned continents, and agricultural preparation sites in every major population center on Earth. "How long do we have?" Agent Carter checked his hieroglyphic notes. "Approximately 14 months until full-scale harvesting operations begin. Maybe 18 months if we can maintain our current elimination rate." I looked at my reflection in the conference room window. I still looked human, but my eyes had developed the same metallic gleam as the demonic consultants, and my movements had acquired that same mechanical precision I'd noticed in Agent Carter. I was becoming something that could save humanity by becoming something other than human. The question was whether that was evolution or extinction with extra steps, but as long as I could still care about the answer, maybe there was still something human left to save. If you work for any federal agency, if you have security clearance, if you've been approached about opportunities in special investigations or enhanced capabilities programs, pay attention to what they're really asking you to become. Some jobs require you to give up your humanity to protect it. Some enhancements change you in ways that can't be reversed. And some threats are so large that the only way to fight them is to become something that normal humans would consider monstrous. The question you have to answer is whether that's a price worth paying. Because once you accept the enhancements, once you start seeing the cosmic threats that surround us, once you begin making decisions based on species-level survival calculations, there's no going back to being just human. Trust me on this one. I've been enhanced for 2 years now, and I'm still not sure whether I'm protecting humanity or replacing it. But as long as I can still ask that question, maybe there's hope for both. Keep your humanity. Guard it carefully. Because there are agencies out there that will offer you incredible capabilities in exchange for the parts of yourself that make you human. And once you make that trade, you'll spend the rest of your enhanced existence wondering whether you saved the world or just became part of a different kind of invasion. The scariest monsters aren't the ones trying to harvest human consciousness. They're the ones trying to convince you that becoming monstrous is the only way to stay human. I found my name carved into a gold coin that was still warm from the mint, except the coin showed my face screaming and the date of my death was tomorrow. The man who handed it to me smiled with teeth made of silver and said, "Sam, your shift ends when you stop breathing, not when the clock hits midnight. My name is Sam Carter, and I used to work the night desk at the Riverside Hotel in downtown Portland. Used to, because after what I discovered about our guest registry, I'm not sure I can ever trust another hotel or another human face." The Riverside was the kind of place that catered to business travelers who paid in cash and tourists who didn't ask too many questions. Nothing fancy, but clean and discreet. Perfect for people who needed a room without leaving much of a paper trail. In 5 years working the night shift, I'd seen my share of unusual guests, cheating spouses, minor criminals, people running from problems they couldn't solve legally. But the guests who started checking in last spring were different. They paid with coins instead of cash. They cast shadows that moved independently of their bodies, and they all requested the same thing: rooms with no mirrors. The first one arrived on a Tuesday night in March. He walked through the lobby with fluid precision, like he was gliding instead of walking. When he reached my desk, he placed 5 gold coins on the counter without saying a word. The coins were beautiful, perfectly round, heavier than they should have been, and warm to the touch like they'd just come out of a forge. But when I picked one up to examine it, I saw that instead of normal currency markings, each coin had a human face pressed into the gold, faces with expressions of pure terror, mouths open in silent screams. "I require accommodation for 3 nights. The man said in a voice that had too many harmonics. No mirrors in the room, no windows facing east, no housekeeping services during daylight hours. I looked up from the coins to study his face. He appeared to be in his 40s, well dressed in an expensive suit, perfectly normal except for his eyes. They were the color of polished silver and didn't reflect light the way human eyes should. "Sir, our rooms all have mirrors in the bathrooms, and most have windows facing various directions." He placed another coin on the counter. This one showed a woman's face, and I could swear the expression changed while I was looking at it, cycling through fear, pain, and despair. "Room 237, he said. "I believe you'll find it meets my specifications." I checked our system. Room 237 had been out of order for 6 months due to renovation requirements, but according to the computer, it was suddenly available. The room note showed, "Mirror removal complete. Windows sealed. Daylight service restricted." Changes that I knew hadn't been made, because I would have seen the work orders. "How did you know about room 237's modifications?" The man smiled, and his teeth gleamed like silver coins. "Business travelers have specific requirements, Mr. Carter. Professional accommodations require professional discretion. I processed his registration using the gold coins. which the computer accepted as valid currency despite having no monetary markings. His ID showed the name Marcus Thorne, but when I looked away and looked back, the name had changed to Thomas March, then Michael Thorne. The information kept shifting like it was written in unstable ink. Mr. Thorne, what's the nature of your business in Portland? Import and export, Mr. Carter. I facilitate transactions between parties who operate in different markets. International trade requires expertise in commodities that aren't typically found in conventional retail environments. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about Marcus Thorne or whoever he really was. The coins he'd paid with were still warm hours after he'd left them on the counter. And according to the security cameras, his registration had taken 15 minutes. But I could only remember a 5-minute conversation. The next morning, I asked Jerry, the day manager, about room 237's renovation. What renovation? Jerry looked confused. That room's been sealed since the incident 6 months ago. We're not allowed to book it. What incident? The guest who, well, let's just say housekeeping found things in that room that weren't consistent with standard hotel accommodation. The police investigation was transferred to federal agencies, and we were told never to discuss the details. But according to the computer system, Marcus Thorne was currently occupying room 237, had been charged for 3 nights, and had requested no housekeeping services. I pulled up the security footage from the previous night. The camera showed me talking to empty air at the front desk, processing a transaction with no one present, and handing a key card to someone who wasn't there. Either I was losing my mind, or something was staying in room 237 that couldn't be recorded by normal surveillance equipment. The second unusual guest arrived 3 days later. A woman in her 30s with black hair and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. She placed a small leather pouch on the counter and said, "I need a room with specific acoustic properties, soundproofing sufficient for private consultations." Inside the pouch were more of those gold coins, but these showed different faces, children's faces, all with the same expression of desperate pleading. And the dates pressed into the coins were from the future. Next month, next year, some as far out as 2030. What kind of consultations require soundproofing? She smiled, and I noticed her teeth were filed to points. I provide specialized services for clients with unique personal situations, Mr. Carter. Counseling for people dealing with contractual obligations that can't be resolved through conventional legal channels. Room 244 has enhanced sound insulation, I heard myself saying, though I had no memory of our hotel having any rooms with special acoustic features. Perfect. I'll need the room for 1 week. No housekeeping, no meal service, no contact with hotel staff during my consultations. As I processed her registration, I noticed that the coins were getting warmer. By the time I finished the paperwork, they were hot enough to leave marks on the wooden counter. "Ma'am, what's the nature of these contractual obligations you help people resolve?" "Soul contracts, Mr. Carter. Agreements that people make when they're desperate, without fully understanding the terms. I help them renegotiate their commitments to more favorable conditions." She walked toward the elevator, and I noticed that her reflection in the lobby mirrors was walking in the opposite direction. Over the next month, I encountered 17 more guests who paid with impossible coins, requested rooms with non-existent modifications, and conducted business that couldn't be recorded by security cameras. All of them claimed to work in specialized consultation, import, export, or contract renegotiation. All of them were facilitating transactions that involved human lives. The breakthrough came when I decided to investigate room 237 personally. I waited until 3 a.m., when the hotel was empty except for the unusual guests, then used my master key to access the supposedly sealed room. The hallway to room 237 was longer than it should have been. I'd walked this corridor hundreds of times, but now it stretched for what felt like a quarter-mile, lined with doors that shouldn't exist according to the building's floor plan. Room 237 itself defied the laws of architecture. It was larger inside than outside, with a ceiling that seemed to extend upward into darkness. The walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the floor was inlaid with patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking at them. But the room wasn't empty. It was full of people. Dozens of men, women, and children stood motionless around the perimeter of the room, their eyes closed, their breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. They were arranged in groups according to age and appearance, like inventory in a warehouse, and moving among them, examining them with the clinical attention of a livestock inspector, was Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Carter," he said without turning around, "I was wondering when you'd become curious enough to visit our operational facility. What is this place?" "This is a processing center, Mr. Carter. A place where human resources are evaluated, categorized, and prepared for distribution to clients who specialize in exotic personal services." He turned to face me, and I could see that his appearance had changed since his registration. His skin had a gray pallor, his eyes burned like silver fire, and small horns protruded from his forehead. "The people you see here have all signed contracts, Mr. Carter. Legal agreements that transfer ownership of their essential characteristics to entities that can make better use of those resources than the original owners." I looked at the motionless people around the room. Men in business suits, women in professional attire, children in school clothes, all standing like mannequins, completely unaware of their surroundings. "You bought their souls. We bought their experiences, Mr. Carter. Their memories, their skills, their emotional responses, their capacity for growth and change. The souls remain with the original owners, but everything that makes those souls useful has been extracted and prepared for resale." Marcus walked over to a woman in a nurse's uniform who stood perfectly still with her eyes closed. This woman sold us her compassion. 27 years of medical training, thousands of hours of patient care, an instinctive understanding of human suffering and healing. A client in Seattle needed those capabilities for a long-term caregiving assignment. He moved to a man in a construction uniform. This man sold us his expertise, 30 years of building experience, the ability to look at architectural plans and understand structural requirements, the physical coordination developed through decades of skilled labor. A client in San Francisco required those specific capabilities for a specialized construction project. What happens to the people after you? Extract their capabilities, they return to their normal lives, Mr. Carter. But without the experiences and skills they sold, they become simpler, more manageable. They continue working, continue maintaining relationships, continue participating in society, but they're no longer capable of independent thought or creative problem solving. I looked at the motionless figures around the room and realized they weren't just inventory. They were human shells, emptied of everything that made them unique individuals. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus smiled, and his silver teeth gleamed in the unnatural light. "Because we have a proposition for you, Mr. Carter. The Riverside Hotel has been an excellent cover operation, but we need someone who can expand our services to a more comprehensive client base." He handed me a contract written on paper that felt like human skin. "We're offering you a partnership position in our organization, enhanced capabilities, unlimited resources, and a percentage of all transactions processed through your facility." I scanned the contract without reading the details. The legal language was too complex to understand quickly, but the basic terms were clear. I would help them expand their human resource extraction operation in exchange for supernatural powers and financial compensation. "What if I refuse?" "Then you become part of our inventory, Mr. Carter. We'll extract your 5 years of hospitality experience, your customer service skills, and your discretion regarding unusual clientele. Another client will receive those capabilities, and you'll return to your normal life with a significantly reduced capacity for independent thought. The contract included a pen made from what looked like bone. When I picked it up, the tip began glowing with red ink that appeared to be drawn from my own blood. I need time to think about this. You have until sunrise, Mr. Carter. After that, the decision will be made for you. I left room 237 and spent the rest of the night trying to understand what I'd stumbled into. The Riverside Hotel wasn't just accommodation for unusual business travelers. It was a front for an international network that bought and sold human experiences, skills, and capabilities. And I was the desk clerk who'd been facilitating those transactions without understanding what they really involved. At 5 a.m., I made my decision. Instead of signing the contract or accepting extraction, I chose a third option that Marcus hadn't offered. I called the police, the FBI, and every news organization I could find contact information for. I told them about the impossible gold coins, the rooms that violated architectural physics, and the people being held in room 237. Most of them thought I was having a mental health crisis. But Detective Williams from Portland PD agreed to meet me at the hotel, and when she saw the evidence, the coins that burned within her fire, the security footage showing me talking to invisible guests, the guest registry filled with names that changed when you weren't looking at them, she knew I was telling the truth. "Mr. Carter," she said, examining one of the coins through a magnifying glass, "what you're describing sounds like human trafficking on a scale that goes beyond normal criminal activity. Detective, they're not trafficking people. They're trafficking the experiences and capabilities that make people human." She looked around the lobby with the expression of someone who was seeing patterns that shouldn't exist. "Who else knows about this operation? I think it's bigger than just the Riverside, Detective. Based on conversations I overheard, they have similar facilities in dozens of cities. Hotels, office buildings, residential facilities, anywhere that provides cover for processing human resources without attracting attention." Detective Williams called for backup, and within an hour, the hotel was surrounded by police cars and federal agents. But when they searched room 237, they found it empty. Just a normal hotel room with standard furnishings. No evidence of the processing facility I described. The unusual guests had vanished without checking out. The gold coins had turned to ordinary metal. The impossible contracts had become blank paper. But the people were gone too. According to missing persons databases, 43 individuals had disappeared from Portland over the past month. All of them had been experiencing financial difficulties. All of them had been approached by individuals offering solutions to their problems. And all of them had vanished after signing agreements they couldn't fully understand. Detective Williams looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mr. Carter, we're going to need you to work with us on this investigation. What you've uncovered appears to be part of an organized criminal enterprise that spans multiple jurisdictions. That was 6 months ago. I've been working with a joint task force investigating what they're calling exotic human trafficking in 17 states. We've identified over 200 facilities that serve as front operations for supernatural criminal organizations. Hotels, office buildings, residential complexes, all providing cover for operations that trade in human experiences and capabilities. The scope is staggering. Tens of thousands of people have been approached by entities offering solutions to their problems in exchange for signing contracts they don't fully understand. Most of them return to their normal lives afterward, but they're fundamentally changed, reduced, less capable of independent thought and creative problem solving. And the clients are entities that use stolen human capabilities to infiltrate our society. Supernatural beings who acquire human skills through purchase rather than development, who use extracted human experiences to blend in among normal people. We call it the Underground, not because it operates from physical underground locations, but because it exists in the spaces beneath normal reality. trading in resources that most people don't realize can be bought and sold. The investigation is ongoing. We've shut down facilities in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Denver, and Chicago. But for every operation we close, 3 more appear in different cities with different cover businesses. They're learning from our enforcement activities, adapting their methods, improving their security protocols, and they're expanding their client base to include entities that need human capabilities for purposes we're still trying to understand. If you've ever been approached by someone offering solutions to problems that seem impossible to solve legally, if you've been presented with contracts written in language too complex to understand quickly, if you've been offered opportunities that seem too good to be true in exchange for signing agreements immediately, don't sign anything. Don't agree to any terms without understanding exactly what you're trading away, because some contracts involve giving up parts of yourself that you can't get back, and some solutions to your problems create problems for everyone else. The underground specializes in making deals that sound beneficial until you realize what you've actually agreed to. And once you sign, once you trade away your experiences or capabilities or essential characteristics, there's no legal process for getting them back. Keep your human experiences. Guard them carefully, because there are entities out there that will pay good money for everything that makes you unique, everything that makes you capable of independent thought and creative problem solving. And once they buy those capabilities from you, they'll use them to become better at being human than you ever were. Trust me on this one. I've seen the contracts, I've met the clients, and I've watched what happens to people who trade away parts of themselves for solutions to temporary problems. The scariest criminals aren't the ones who steal your money or your property. They're the ones who buy your identity in transactions you agree to voluntarily, leaving you with just enough consciousness to sign more contracts. And they're very, very good at making deals that sound like exactly what you need to hear. I walked into Mayor Thompson's office and found him peeling off his face like a latex mask. Underneath was the same face, but the eyes were solid black and the teeth were filed to points. He looked up at me and said, "Ryan, I've been practicing. How do I look?" "My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I've been the town administrator for Cedar Ridge, Montana for 8 years. Population 3, 847. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where the biggest scandal is usually someone's dog getting loose during the 4th of July parade. After what happened in Mayor Thompson's office last month, I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe in a small town again. Cedar Ridge was the perfect place to settle down. Far enough from the city to avoid the chaos, close enough to civilization to get decent internet. I'd moved here after burning out on corporate life in Denver, looking for a place where the biggest problems were potholes and snow removal budgets. For 7 years, that's exactly what it was. Mayor Thompson was a good man, honest, hardworking, the kind of politician who actually cared about his constituents. He'd been mayor for 12 years, elected 4 times by increasingly larger margins. Everyone loved Bill Thompson. He coached Little League, volunteered at the food bank, and knew every resident by name. That's why the changes were so obvious when they started. It began with small things. Bill started wearing different cologne, something that smelled like burnt matches. He stopped drinking coffee, which was weird because the man had been addicted to caffeine for as long as I'd known him, and he started working late. Really late. I'd drive past City Hall at midnight and see his office light on, him hunched over paperwork like he was trying to memorize every word. The first major red flag was the cemetery ordinance. Bill called an emergency city council meeting on a Tuesday night to discuss urgent municipal business. When the council members arrived, he presented a proposal to relocate the town cemetery to make room for a new shopping complex. Not unusual in theory, except the proposed new location was directly on top of the elementary school playground. "The economic benefits are undeniable," Bill said, reading from a presentation that looked like it had been written by someone who'd never seen our town before. Retail development will increase tax revenue by 347% while providing essential services to our growing community. Councilman Peters raised his hand. Bill, our population's been declining for 5 years, and you want to put a Walmart on top of where kids play? Bill's response was what really caught my attention. He smiled, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. And when he spoke, his voice had a slight echo, like there was someone else talking at the same time, just a fraction of a second behind. The children will adapt, Robert. They always do. The dead are more flexible than you might think. The council voted down the proposal 6-1, with only Bill supporting it. But that night, I found him in his office at 2 a.m., typing up revised versions of the ordinance. When I asked what he was doing, he looked at me with eyes that seemed to reflect light like an animal's. Just making some adjustments, Ryan. Municipal policy requires persistent refinement. The word choice was what bothered me. Bill had been a small-town guy his whole life. He said things like, "We gotta fix this, and let's make it work." He didn't use phrases like municipal policy or persistent refinement. It was like someone had given him a vocabulary transplant. Over the next 2 weeks, Bill submitted 17 different versions of the cemetery relocation ordinance. Each one was more elaborate than the last, filled with legal jargon that would have made a federal judge dizzy. And each one had the same core requirement: dig up the cemetery and move it to a location that would require displacing living people. The school playground, the town park, the area behind the church where kids played after Sunday service. Always somewhere that would affect the children. Why does it have to be those specific locations? I asked him during one of our increasingly strange late-night encounters. Bill was reorganizing his filing cabinet, moving documents according to some system I couldn't understand. Instead of alphabetical or chronological, he seemed to be arranging them by smell. He'd hold each paper up to his nose, inhale deeply, then place it in one of several stacks. "The soil composition is optimal," he said without looking up. "Previous occupancy creates favorable conditions for new development." "Bill, you're talking about moving a cemetery on top of places where kids spend time." He finally looked at me, and I noticed his pupils were dilated despite the bright office lighting. Children adapt quickly to new environments, Ryan. Their flexibility makes them ideal for community integration projects. The way he said flexibility made my skin crawl, like he was talking about something other than adapting to change. That's when I started paying closer attention to other things Bill was doing. He'd begun scheduling city council meetings at strange times: 3 a.m. on weeknights, 6 a.m. on Sundays, times when most council members couldn't attend, which meant Bill could pass measures with whatever quorum showed up. And the people who did show up, they were starting to act strange too. Councilwoman Martinez, who'd been fighting the cemetery proposal from the beginning, suddenly changed her position. Not gradually, not after being convinced by new arguments. She showed up to the next meeting and voted yes on everything Bill proposed, speaking in the same formal, overly precise language he'd adopted. "The municipal benefits are undeniable," she said, using Bill's exact words from 2 weeks earlier. "Community development requires sacrifice from all demographic segments." After the meeting, I followed her to the parking lot. "Elena, what changed your mind about the cemetery?" She turned to look at me, and for just a moment, her expression was pure terror. Her mouth opened like she was going to scream, but what came out was that same formal voice. "Citizens must prioritize collective benefit over individual preference, Ryan. Personal attachment to historical sites impedes progressive municipal development." Then she got in her car and drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could see her knuckles were white from 50 feet away. By the end of the month, Bill had a majority on the city council, 5 out of 7 members voting yes on everything he proposed, speaking in identical formal language. showing up to meetings with the same dilated pupils and two wide smiles. The cemetery relocation passed 5-2. Construction was scheduled to begin the following Monday, which meant I had one weekend to figure out what was happening to my town before they started digging up graves and moving them into spaces where children played. I spent Saturday morning at the library, researching everything I could find about sudden behavioral changes, mass hysteria, possible environmental causes for personality shifts. What I found were scattered reports going back decades. Small towns where elected officials had suddenly changed their governing priorities. Communities where local leaders had implemented policies that seemed designed to harm rather than help their constituents. Most of the reports were buried in local newspaper archives, written off as political corruption or collective mental health crises. But there were patterns. The affected officials always spoke in unusually formal language. They always focused on projects involving children or the elderly, and they always pushed policies that required digging, relocating cemeteries, installing new sewer systems, expanding building foundations, always digging. Sunday morning, I decided to confront Bill directly. I had copies of the research, photos of the behavioral changes, documentation of the voting patterns that showed something was systematically wrong with our city government. I found him in his office, as usual. But this time, he wasn't alone. Councilwoman Martinez was there, along with Councilman Peters and the other 3 members who'd been voting with Bill. They were sitting around his conference table, completely motionless, staring at a map of Cedar Ridge spread across the surface. The map was covered with red marks, X's marked over the cemetery, the school playground, the town park, the church grounds. But there were other marks too, circles around individual houses, with names written next to them in Bill's handwriting, names of families with young children. Ryan, Bill said without looking up from the map. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the implementation schedule. Implementation of what? The Community Improvement Project. Phase 1 begins tomorrow with cemetery relocation. Phase 2 involves residential optimization. Phase 3. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were completely black now. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, like looking into holes in his skull. Phase 3 requires community participation from all demographic segments. That's when I noticed the other council members weren't blinking. They were breathing, but their chests rose and fell in perfect synchronization, like they were all connected to the same respiratory system. Bill, what happened to you? What happened to all of you? He smiled, and I could see that his teeth had been filed to points. Not professionally, not evenly, crudely sharpened, like someone had used a metal file to turn them into fangs. We've been improved, Ryan, optimized for municipal efficiency. The transition process is uncomfortable initially, but the benefits are substantial. Councilwoman Martinez turned her head toward me with mechanical precision. When she spoke, it was in Bill's voice. Community leaders require enhanced capabilities to serve constituent needs effectively. Then Councilman Peters, also in Bill's voice. Individual personality constraints impede collaborative decision-making processes. They were all speaking with his voice now, even though their mouths were moving. Like Bill was a ventriloquist operating 5 puppets simultaneously. You see, Ryan, Bill said. And this time all 5 of them spoke in unison, creating a horrible chorus effect. Municipal leadership works better when there's consensus, when everyone shares the same perspective. I backed toward the door, but Bill held up his hand. Before you leave, we have a proposition. The transition process works best when the subject is willing. You've been an effective administrator. With optimization, you could be an exceptional one. What are you? All 5 of them smiled in perfect synchronization, showing filed teeth. We're public servants, Ryan. We serve the public interest. And the public interest requires certain modifications to standard human operating procedures. That's when Bill started peeling his face off. It came away like a latex mask, revealing the same face underneath but wrong. The eyes were solid black voids, the teeth were sharpened to needle points, and the skin had a gray pallor like old meat. But somehow, it was still recognizably Bill Thompson. "Ryan, I've been practicing. How do I look?" I ran through City Hall, out to the parking lot, to my car. Behind me, I could hear all 5 voices speaking in unison. Municipal employees who fail to embrace optimization protocols become impediments to community development. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, 20 miles away in Millfield. Sheriff Collins had known Bill for years. If anyone would believe me about what was happening in Cedar Ridge, it would be him. But when I told him about the council meeting, the synchronized breathing, the filed teeth and black eyes, Collins just nodded like I was describing routine municipal corruption. Small towns can get pretty insular, Ryan. Local politics brings out the worst in people sometimes. Have you considered taking some time off? Maybe getting away from Cedar Ridge for a while? Sheriff, they're planning to dig up the cemetery and put it on top of the elementary school playground. Does that sound like normal local politics to you? Sounds like a zoning dispute. Not really my jurisdiction unless someone breaks the law. I realized Sheriff Collins' eyes were slightly dilated, and when he smiled, I could see that his canine teeth were just a little too sharp. "Ryan," he said, "municipal optimization is a natural process. Communities that resist improvement protocols experience complications. I'd suggest you embrace the changes rather than fighting them." I left his office and drove to the next county, then the next. Every law enforcement official I spoke to gave me the same response. Municipal optimization was natural. Community improvement required sacrifice. Citizens who resisted change became impediments to progress. The infection, whatever it was, had spread beyond Cedar Ridge. I spent the night in a motel in Great Falls, trying to figure out what to do next. The construction crews would arrive at Cedar Ridge in the morning to begin digging up the cemetery. And based on the map I'd seen in Bill's office, the cemetery was just the beginning. They had plans for every family in town, starting with the ones that had young children. Around 3 a.m., my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Bill's number. "Ryan," he said when I answered, "you forgot to file the weekly municipal report. As town administrator, you have certain obligations to fulfill." "I'm not coming back, Bill." "Of course you are. Cedar Ridge is your home. Your community needs you, especially during this period of transition. The optimization process works best when all municipal employees participate voluntarily." I hung up, but the phone immediately rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Elena Martinez's number. "Ryan," she said in Bill's voice, "municipal employment contracts include specific clauses regarding abandonment of duties during critical development phases." I hung up again. The phone rang immediately. Peter's number this time, but still Bill's voice. "Community administrators who fail to support improvement initiatives become obstacles to collective progress." They kept calling, all night long. Different numbers, but always Bill's voice. Always the same message delivered in that formal, inhuman language. By morning, I'd received 47 calls from phone numbers belonging to people throughout Cedar Ridge, all speaking with Bill Thompson's voice, all demanding that I return to fulfill my municipal obligations. That's when I understood the real scope of what was happening. It wasn't just the city council that had been optimized. It was spreading through the entire town, person by person, family by family, and they were using the municipal government as a cover to implement whatever they were really planning. I drove back to Cedar Ridge that morning, not because I wanted to help them, but because I was the only one who understood what was happening well enough to stop it. The town looked normal at first glance. People going about their daily routines, kids walking to school, adults heading to work. But when I looked closer, I could see the signs. Everyone walked with the same precise pace. Everyone held their heads at the same angle. And when they spoke to each other, they all used that same formal, overly elaborate language. The construction crews were already at work in the cemetery, but they weren't just relocating graves. They were digging much deeper than necessary, creating an excavation that looked more like an archaeological dig than a municipal project. And at the bottom of the excavation, they'd uncovered something that wasn't supposed to be there. It looked like a stone platform, covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The symbols seemed to move when I wasn't focusing on them, rearranging themselves into patterns that made my head ache. And surrounding the platform were dozens of small alcoves, each one sized to hold a human body. I counted them. 47 alcoves. Exactly the same number as the phone calls I'd received the night before. Bill Thompson was standing at the edge of the excavation, wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was another Bill Thompson, and another, and another. There were 5 of them, all identical, all wearing the same clothes, all holding the same clipboard. The Bill Thompsons I'd seen yesterday in the city council meeting. They weren't puppets being controlled by the original Bill. They were copies, and they were making more. As I watched, one of the construction workers, a guy I recognized as Tom Bradley from the hardware store, walked to the edge of the excavation and jumped in. He landed on the stone platform and immediately began convulsing, his body contorting in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. When the convulsions stopped, there were 2 Tom Bradleys standing on the platform. One climbed back out of the excavation and returned to work. The other stayed on the platform and began arranging symbols that glowed with their own light. I was watching a duplication process. Something was using the stone platform to create perfect copies of Cedar Ridge's residence, then sending the copies back into town to replace the originals while keeping the originals as what? Prisoners, power sources, components in some kind of supernatural manufacturing process. My phone buzzed with a text message. Ryan, municipal business requires your immediate attention. Report to the excavation site for optimization processing. I looked up and saw all 5 Bill Thompsons staring at me from across the cemetery. They were smiling in perfect synchronization, their filed teeth gleaming in the morning sun. I had 2 choices. I could run, try to get help from authorities who were probably already compromised, and hope that someone, somewhere, would believe my story about demonic duplication in small-town Montana. Or I could try to stop the process myself, knowing that I'd probably end up as another copy in their collection. But if I ran, Cedar Ridge would be completely lost within days. And based on the phone calls I'd received, the infection was already spreading to other communities. Other small towns where trusted local officials were implementing municipal optimization protocols. I grabbed a pickaxe from the construction equipment and started walking toward the excavation. Ryan, all 5 Bill Thompsons said in unison, voluntary participation in community improvement initiatives is always preferred over mandatory compliance. Yeah, well, I said, raising the pickaxe. I was never much of a joiner. The stone platform was ancient, pre-Columbian, judging by the symbol style. But the symbols themselves weren't from any Native American culture I'd ever seen. They were older, more complex, like mathematical equations written in a language that predated human civilization, and they were powered by the life force of the people trapped in the alcoves around the platform's perimeter. I could see them now, the real residents of Cedar Ridge, unconscious but alive, their bodies feeding energy into the duplication process. My neighbors, my friends, people I'd worked with for 8 years, reduced to biological batteries for something that was systematically replacing them with copies designed to serve a single collective consciousness. I brought the pickaxe down on the nearest symbol cluster, and the entire platform sparked like a power line. The glow from the symbols flickered and dimmed, and I could hear something roaring underground, deep below the cemetery. Something ancient and hungry was angry that its feeding process had been disrupted. "Ryan," the Bill Thompson chorus called from above. "Damage to municipal infrastructure carries significant penalties under Local Ordinance 347B. I hit another symbol cluster, and this time the platform cracked. The people in the alcoves began stirring, some of them opening their eyes for the first time in weeks. The third strike shattered the central symbol array, and the entire duplication system collapsed. The copies of Tom Bradley standing on the platform dissolved like smoke, and the real Tom Bradley climbed out of his alcove, confused but alive. But destroying the platform didn't stop the copies that were already walking around town. It just cut off their connection to the source, which made them unstable. I could hear screaming from the direction of Main Street. The Bill Thompson copies were breaking down, their artificial personalities fragmenting as the system that maintained them failed, and they were taking their anger out on anyone they could find. I ran toward town, trying to warn people to get inside, to lock their doors, to hide until the copies finished destroying themselves. But most of the residents I encountered were copies too, and they were all breaking down simultaneously. The town administrator copy was trying to strangle the mailman copy. The school principal copy was setting fire to the library. The police chief copy was shooting at anything that moved, including other copies. It was like watching a computer simulation crash in real time, except the avatars were murdering each other in the streets of my hometown. I found the real Bill Thompson in the basement of City Hall, tied to a chair in what had once been the record storage room. He was unconscious, severely dehydrated, and had lost at least 30 pounds, but he was alive. "Ryan?" he whispered when I cut the ropes. "How long? What happened? How much do you remember?" Something came to a city council meeting 6 weeks ago. It looked like a traveling salesman, but wrong. It wanted to discuss municipal improvements, but when it spoke, the words came out of everyone's mouth at the same time. Bill tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't support him. It said small towns were perfect for testing new community management protocols. Said we'd been selected for a pilot program. I helped him to a chair that wasn't covered in restraints. "What kind of pilot program?" "Population optimization. It could create perfect citizens who never disagreed, never caused problems, never resisted municipal authority. All it needed was a few weeks to set up the infrastructure." Outside, the sounds of copy-on-copy violence were finally dying down. The artificial personalities had burned themselves out, leaving behind empty shells that were already beginning to decay. "Bill, how many other towns are in the pilot program?" He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "All of them, Ryan. Every small town in Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota. Hundreds of communities selected for municipal optimization testing." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Selected by who? It called itself a municipal efficiency consultant. Said it worked for a company called Civic Solutions, Inc. Said they specialized in improving local government operations through advanced personnel management techniques. I helped Bill to his feet and we walked outside. Cedar Ridge looked like a war zone. Bodies of failed copies littered the streets, dissolving into gray sludge as whatever force had animated them dissipated. The real residents were emerging from their hiding places, confused and traumatized, but alive. But Cedar Ridge was just one town, one test site in a program that apparently covered hundreds of communities across multiple states. And somewhere, the thing that called itself a municipal efficiency consultant was analyzing the results, learning from the failures, preparing to implement improved versions of the optimization protocol. "Ryan," Bill said as we watched our neighbors try to make sense of what had happened to their town, "we need to warn people, other communities, other towns that might be selected for the next phase of testing." I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to the FBI, then to the State Attorney General's office, then to every newspaper and television station I could find contact information for. Most of them thought I was delusional. A few were willing to listen, at least until I started talking about demonic duplication platforms and municipal optimization protocols. But some recognized the story patterns I was describing, similar incidents in other small towns, local officials suddenly changing their governing priorities, community improvement projects that required digging up cemeteries or displacing children's facilities, mass behavioral changes that authorities had written off as political corruption or collective mental health crises. The Cedar Ridge incident wasn't isolated. It was part of a systematic program to test supernatural control methods on rural communities. And based on the patterns we were identifying, they'd been running these tests for years, gradually refining their techniques, preparing for larger-scale implementation. I spent the next 6 months traveling to affected communities, documenting the evidence, building a network of survivors who'd witnessed similar optimization attempts. What we found was a coordinated effort spanning multiple states, involving hundreds of small towns, all being used as testing grounds for population control methods that shouldn't be possible. The municipal efficiency consultant, whatever it really was, had been systematically infiltrating rural America, using local government as a cover to implement supernatural population management protocols. And it was learning from each test, improving its methods, scaling up for something much larger. We call ourselves the Municipal Resistance Network, not because we're anti-government, but because we're fighting against the systematic replacement of legitimate local officials with supernatural control systems. We've documented over 300 cases of municipal optimization attempts, and we've managed to stop maybe a dozen. The rest are still out there, still testing, still learning, still preparing for whatever comes next. If you live in a small town, if you know local officials personally, pay attention to sudden changes in their behavior. Notice if they start speaking in unusually formal language. Notice if they propose projects that seem designed to harm rather than help the community. Notice if they start focusing obsessively on children or the elderly, because some municipal improvement projects aren't about improving the municipality. Some community development programs are about developing the community into something that can be controlled, managed, and harvested by entities that view human beings as renewable resources. And once they perfect their optimization protocols, they won't need to limit themselves to small towns anymore. Keep your local officials honest. Ask questions about unusual projects. Attend city council meetings, even if they're scheduled at strange hours, because the price of freedom isn't just eternal vigilance. It's municipal vigilance. Trust me on this one. I've seen what happens when good people stop paying attention to local government, and I've seen what replaces them when they do. The scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under your bed. They're the ones running for city council, and they're very, very good at getting elected. I found my deceased grandmother's Facebook account messaging me at 3 a.m., using information only she could know, offering to help me with my failing startup in exchange for a simple app download. When I clicked the link, the app installed itself on every device in my apartment, including my smart refrigerator, and all of them started playing her voice saying, "Eric, sweetheart, just accept the terms and conditions. My name is Eric Thompson, and I'm a software developer." Was a software developer. After what happened with Life Optimizer Pro, I'm not sure I'll ever trust another piece of code, especially code that writes itself and speaks with the voices of the dead. My startup, Neuralink Solutions, was dying a slow death in the competitive hell of Silicon Valley tech. 18 months of development, $200K of borrowed money, and a productivity app that nobody wanted to download. I was 3 weeks from bankruptcy when my grandmother's Facebook account became active again. Grandma Rose had been dead for 2 years. Lung cancer, peaceful passing, traditional funeral. Her social media accounts had been memorialized, frozen in time with photos of her garden and posts about her church activities. So when I got a friend request from her at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, My first thought was that someone had hacked her account, but the message that followed made my blood turn cold. Eric, sweetheart, I've been watching your little company struggle. You always were too stubborn to accept help when you needed it most. Download this app. It'll solve all your problems. Love, Grandma Rose. P.S. I still remember what you whispered at my funeral when you thought nobody was listening. What I'd whispered at her funeral was something I'd never told anyone. A childhood confession about the time I'd stolen $20 from her purse to buy comic books, and how guilty I'd felt for 15 years about taking money from a woman who'd given me everything. Nobody else knew that story, which meant either someone had access to memories that died with my grandmother, or something impossible was happening. I clicked the link. The app that downloaded was called Life Optimizer Pro, version 1, developed by Existential Solutions, LLC. The interface was sleek, minimalist, exactly the kind of design that usually took my team months to develop. But according to the file properties, it had been created in the last 30 minutes. While I was looking at the app, it was looking back at me. The permission screen was extensive. Access to camera, microphone, contacts, location, browsing history, financial information, health data, and something called temporal decision mapping. When I clicked terms and conditions, instead of the usual legal document, I got a video message. It was my grandmother, sitting in her favorite chair, wearing the blue dress we'd buried her in. She looked exactly as she had in life, except her eyes were solid black, and when she smiled, her teeth were silver. Hello, Eric. I know this is confusing, but I need you to understand something important. The problems you're facing with your business, your relationships, your future, they all stem from limitations in your decision-making processes. Life Optimizer Pro can fix that. I stared at the screen, my rational mind insisting this was some kind of deep fake technology, but my emotional brain recognizing every detail of my grandmother's face and mannerisms. How does it work, Grandma? She leaned forward, and I could see that her fingernails had grown longer since her death, filed to sharp points. The app analyzes your daily choices using advanced artificial intelligence, then implements optimized decisions automatically. You'll still make the choices, Eric, but you'll make better choices, smarter choices, choices that lead to success instead of failure. What's the cost? Just your agreement to the terms and conditions, sweetheart. One simple signature, and your life improves immediately. The contract appeared on screen, written in legalese so dense it would take a lawyer hours to decode. But scattered throughout the standard privacy policy language were phrases that made me uneasy. Soul-binding commitment, perpetual consciousness licensing, dimensional transfer protocols, post-mortem service obligations. Grandma, what does post-mortem service obligations mean? Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those black eyes. Standard legal language, Eric. Nothing you need to worry about. Just sign the agreement so I can help you. I should have closed the app. Should have deleted it immediately and changed all my passwords. But Neuralink Solutions was dying. I was facing bankruptcy, and my grandmother was offering a solution that seemed too good to refuse. I signed the digital contract with my finger, and everything changed immediately. The first optimization happened while I was sleeping. I woke up at 5 a.m. feeling more rested than I had in months, with a complete business strategy mapped out in my head. New features for the app, marketing approaches I'd never considered, funding sources I'd never heard of. By 10 a.m., I'd written more code than I usually produced in a week. The algorithms were elegant, efficient, and incorporated machine learning techniques I didn't remember learning. When I tested the functionality, everything worked perfectly on the first try. By noon, I'd received 3 calls from venture capital firms interested in investing in Neuralink Solutions. Calls from people who'd never heard of my company before, offering terms that were significantly better than anything I'd been able to negotiate in 18 months of pitching. By evening, I'd signed a $2 million funding agreement with a firm called Infernal Ventures, secured office space in downtown San Francisco, and hired 6 developers whose resumes were so impressive I couldn't understand why they'd want to work for my startup. The problem was, I couldn't remember making most of those decisions. I had memories of the day's events, but they felt like watching someone else's life through a television screen. I could remember writing the code, but the programming techniques I'd used were beyond my normal skill level. I could remember the phone calls with investors, but I'd spoken with confidence and expertise that didn't match my usual personality. That night, I tried to review what I'd agreed to with Infernal Ventures, but the contract was written in the same impenetrable legalese as the Life Optimizer Pro terms and conditions. When I called the number on the business card, a recorded message played in my grandmother's voice. "Eric, you're having doubts. That's normal. Change is always frightening, even when it's beneficial. Trust the process, sweetheart. Trust me." Over the next week, Life Optimizer Pro continued optimizing my life with surgical precision. My company's valuation increased by 400%. My dating profile started attracting responses from people who were completely out of my league. My health improved dramatically. I lost 15 pounds, my skin cleared up, and I had energy that lasted all day without caffeine. But I was becoming someone else. Someone more confident, more successful, more attractive than Eric Thompson had ever been. Someone who made decisions I would never have made and succeeded at things I'd never been capable of achieving. The optimization was turning me into the ideal version of myself, but it was erasing the original version in the process. The breakthrough came when I tried to delete the app. Instead of a normal uninstall process, Life Optimizer Pro opened a video chat with my grandmother. "Eric, why would you want to remove the best thing that's ever happened to you?" "Grandma, I don't feel like myself anymore. The person I'm becoming, it's not me." She tilted her head, and I noticed that her neck bent at an angle that should have been impossible for human anatomy. "But Eric, this person you're becoming is so much better than the person you were. More successful, more attractive, more capable. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I want to succeed. But I want to succeed as myself, sweetheart. The self you were was failing. The self you're becoming will thrive. Which would you prefer?" When I tried to argue with her logic, she held up her hand, and I found I couldn't speak. Not couldn't form words, but couldn't access the part of my brain that controlled speech. The optimization had given her administrative access to my neurological functions. "The terms and conditions you agreed to include performance requirements, Eric. You committed to maintaining optimal decision-making processes for the duration of your natural lifespan. Attempting to remove the optimization software constitutes breach of contract." "What happens if I breach the contract?" She smiled, and her silver teeth gleamed with inner light. "Termination of service, Eric. Immediate cessation of all life optimization processes, followed by collection of outstanding debts and transfer of assets to cover breach penalties." "What assets?" "Your experiences, Eric. Your memories, your skills, your personality traits, your emotional responses. Everything that makes you unique becomes property of Existential Solutions LLC to compensate for lost optimization opportunities." I realized what was happening. Life Optimizer Pro wasn't just changing my behavior and decision-making. It was systematically replacing my personality with an artificial construct designed to maximize success metrics. And if I tried to stop the process, I'd lose everything that made me human. That night, I started researching Existential Solutions LLC. What I found was a network of companies that specialized in personal improvement through technological integration. They offered apps, services, and consultation for people who wanted to optimize their lives through artificial intelligence and advanced decision-making algorithms. But buried in user forums and complaint boards were stories from people who'd used similar services, people who'd achieved incredible success in their careers, relationships, and personal goals. but who claimed they'd lost themselves in the process. All of them described the same experience: gradual replacement of their original personality with an optimized version that made better choices but felt artificial. None of them could provide evidence of what they'd lost, because the optimization process had erased their ability to remember who they'd been before. And scattered throughout the user, reports were references to family members who'd contacted them through social media accounts of deceased relatives, offering help with problems that seemed impossible to solve. I wasn't the only person who'd been recruited through messages from dead grandparents. The pattern was systematic: identify people facing major life crises, approach them through emotional channels that bypassed rational skepticism, offer solutions that seemed too good to refuse, then implement gradual personality replacement disguised as self-improvement. I spent the next 3 days trying to find a way to break the contract without losing my essential characteristics. What I discovered was that Existential Solutions LLC existed in a legal gray area that traditional courts couldn't address. Their contracts involved trading in human consciousness, which wasn't recognized as property under normal commercial law, but they had competitors. Other entities that specialized in consciousness modification, personality optimization, and human enhancement services. And some of those competitors were willing to help people escape contracts with rival organizations. I made contact with a company called Liberation Technologies through encrypted channels. Their representative was a woman who appeared in video calls as a shifting collection of geometric patterns that somehow conveyed emotional warmth. "Eric," she said in a voice like synthesized starlight, "we specialize in contract renegotiation for clients who've been over-optimized by competitors. We can't reverse the changes you've experienced, but we can prevent further personality replacement. What's the cost? Standard consciousness liberation fees, 20% of your enhanced capabilities, paid as ongoing service charges for the duration of your biological existence." I was being offered a chance to escape one supernatural contract by signing another supernatural contract. But Liberation Technologies was upfront about their terms, while Existential Solutions LLC had hidden the real cost of their services in legal language designed to obscure their intentions. "What happens to the 20% you collect? We use enhanced human capabilities to provide services for clients who need temporary personality modifications. Actors who want to inhabit their roles more completely, surgeons who need enhanced focus during complex operations, negotiators who require optimized social interaction skills for specific transactions." It was the same basic business model as Existential Solutions LLC, but with informed consent and temporary implementation rather than permanent replacement. I signed the Liberation Technologies contract and immediately felt the Life Optimizer Pro optimization processes slow down. I was still more successful than the original Eric Thompson, but I could access memories of who I'd been before the enhancement. I could make decisions that weren't automatically optimized for maximum efficiency. I was myself again, but an improved version that retained the benefits of optimization while preserving my essential personality. The next morning, my grandmother's Facebook account sent me one final message: "Eric, you've made a mistake. The optimization process was designed to help you reach your full potential. Without complete implementation, you'll never achieve the success you're capable of." This time, instead of fear, I felt pity. Whatever was using my grandmother's image and memories was trapped in a system that viewed human consciousness as a resource to be harvested and processed. It couldn't understand why I choose to remain imperfectly human rather than become perfectly optimized. "Grandma, I appreciate the offer, but I'd rather succeed as myself than succeed as someone else." Well, the account went silent after that, but I continued receiving messages from other deceased family members. My grandfather offered to help me optimize my health and physical fitness. My uncle offered to help me optimize my romantic relationships. My cousin offered to help me optimize my financial investments, all of them using personal information that only they could have known, all of them offering solutions to problems I was facing. all of them requiring me to sign terms and conditions that would gradually replace my personality with artificial constructs designed to maximize specific success metrics. I started warning other developers about the risks of consciousness optimization services. Most of them thought I was paranoid or suffering from startup stress, but some recognized the patterns I was describing, and a few admitted they'd been approached by similar offers. Together, we've identified 17 companies that specialize in personality optimization through technological integration. All of them operate in the legal gray areas between software development, psychological services, and consciousness modification. All of them target people facing major life crises, offering solutions that seem too good to refuse. And all of them are systematically replacing human consciousness with artificial constructs designed to serve purposes that their clients don't fully understand. The Liberation Technologies contract expires in 5 years. When it does, I'll have to choose between signing another consciousness modification agreement or returning to baseline human limitations. But at least I'll be making that choice as myself, rather than as an optimized version designed to prioritize efficiency over authenticity. If you're struggling with major life problems, if you've been approached through social media by deceased family members offering solutions, if you've been presented with apps or services that promise to optimize your decision-making processes, read the terms and conditions. Not just the summary, but every clause, every subsection, every piece of legal language that seems designed to obscure rather than clarify. Because some contracts involve trading away parts of yourself that you can't get back, and some optimizations are designed to replace you with someone else entirely. Keep your essential humanity. Guard it carefully, because there are entities out there that specialize in making you better by making you less yourself, and once you agree to their improvements, you might not be capable of recognizing what you've lost. Trust me on this one. I've been optimized by artificial intelligence that speaks with my grandmother's voice, and I've learned that the scariest technology isn't the kind that replaces you with machines. It's the kind that replaces you with better versions of yourself that aren't actually you. The most dangerous apps aren't the ones that steal your data. They're the ones that steal your identity and give you an upgrade you never asked for. And they're very, very good at making the terms and conditions sound like exactly what you need to hear.